I give the call to the Minister, or the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, the member for Barton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I acknowledge this Parliament sits and I give this speech on the lands of the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri peoples, and I honour the ongoing contribution of their elders, past and present, to the world's oldest continuing culture. I thank the Prime Minister, the Minister, and my friend, the Leader of the Opposition, for their words today. And I recognise my dear friends, Senator McCarthy and Senator Dodson, watching on. We are here to remember that speech given by Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. I know there are many Australians who remember that day with absolute clarity. I certainly do. The way it felt, the way it made them think about our country and its future. It was not only a document or speech to Parliament, it was a cultural moment shared by this country. It was, of course, also a speech in a place and time. It was a day of great ceremony. First Nations leaders and members of the stolen generation from around the country were here. In the galleries, on those chairs near the door, but there were no First Nations people seated among the members in that Parliament. There was no First Nations member to give a speech to mark the first or second. It wasn't until the member for Haslock arrived in 2010, more than a century after Federation, with his story and the story of his mother, that there was a First Nations member in this place, of course, after Senator Bonner in the other place. It would take another election for Nova Peris to join the Senate as the First Nations' first woman ever elected to our Parliament. We should never leave it unstated just how long the reconciliation journey has been in our country. The apology was not the work of one person only. It was not the sentence that ends the story. It was a way marker in a century of work, a marker that shows how far we have come, that showed us what we can achieve and how much further we have to travel. William Cooper, Pearl Gibbs, Jack Patton, William Ferguson, Aunty Marge Tucker and others, leaders that got us to the day of mourning, erected a marker, proud and tall. They weren't acknowledged as citizens at that time in this country, and they had to seek permission from the Board of Protectors to exercise their basic human rights. But they got that marker up anyway. Charles Perkins and other freedom riders laid down another marker as they showed what ongoing discrimination was. That was not a thing overseas, it was in fact here in our own country. With other leaders like Faith Bandler and Jessie Street, the light they shone on their path helped us find our way together, to voting yes in the 1967 referendum on counting Aboriginal people in the census. Sometimes, Mr. Speaker, the big markers are set by a country. Other times, it's for people and an umbrella. That's how Michael Anderson, the late Billy Craigie, the late Bertie Williams, and the late Tony Corey founded the Tent Embassy. 50 years later, only Michael survives, but the Tent Embassy and its message remain. 30 years ago, in a park in Redfern, Paul Keating understood the power of truth in our reconciliation journey. I was there. And crucially, that is a journey of imagination. Sometimes people find fiction is the entry to that imagination. In my inaugural speech in the New South Wales Parliament, I spoke about the message of To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. And the message was putting on yourself in someone else's shoes, as the Minister has told us about today. The member for Grainler spoke about Senator Dodson hiding in the long grass, watching as the welfare officers took away his mates. Put yourself in the shoes of that little boy, not just in that moment, but in the earlier moments of his life that meant he knew he needed to run and hide. and the girl that helped choose Senator Dodson in the first place. Imagine what it was like for those who had nowhere to run. Put yourself in the shoes of a 3-year-old, wrapped in the love of a large family, to have that love ripped away. To put yourself in the shoes of parents loving, caring, and now grieving. As Paul Keating said in that speech, these things could happen because of failure to imagine these things being done to us. Australia likes to think it is better at imagining now, and in some ways it is. Sometimes. To imagine what living in a remote community is like, with 15, 20 people in a 3-bedroom house, what that's like, of not having enough RATS tests to go around, when local services are failing because there aren't any staff to step up when those on the front line have to isolate, and when less than half of the community is vaccinated. Every day I hold my breath and hope, because that failure could mean the end for far too many who carry our culture and language. Our elders are our libraries, they are our internet, and they cannot be replaced. The Bringing Them Home report shone a clear, unwavering light on truths that had been kept in the dark for too long. The truths it spoke were not things past, they were truths embodied in living people. John Howard did not see this as a moment for change. He saw the moment for change bringing them home demanded as something to be weathered, not grasped. Determination is a great quality in a leader, but stubbornness is not. 350,000 people walked across the Sydney Harbour Bridge. 300,000 marched in Melbourne. Australia was ready to set another marker down and march on together on our reconciliation journey. We had to hold our breath and wait, because the Prime Minister would not let us breathe, was determined to hold us back. It wasn't until we chose a government and a leader that knew ignoring our past, ignoring the lived reality of so many was not an option, that the country exhaled, that we could take the next steps in our journey of reconciliation. In 2008, we had a government and a leader which could see the world wearing another's shoes, and I was really interested in hearing, Prime Minister, that you spoke in that debate. Australia chose a government that could imagine, as Paul Keating said. It seems to me that if we can imagine the injustice, we can imagine its opposite. And so Kevin Rudd apologised to the silent generations for the hurt our country did to us, our families, and to our nation's soul. Last year I spoke about Marnie May Robinson, how we fell into each other's arms in the foyer of the Parliament. She was carrying a photograph of her mother, an 8-year-old girl, and she said, "Linda, I brought Mummy with me today." The apology gave us closing the gap, our national acknowledgement that structural change is necessary, and the Prime Minister spoke about that today, and our national commitment to achieve that change. The apology recognised that a moment of change demands we step confidently forward together. It was a speech of truth that set us free to exhale. But it's what we do with that freedom that matters, as my friend, the leader of the Labor Party, said. The next steps of walking together are up to us. Another moment of change is here. The Uluru Statement is clear and points us to our next steps. Voice, treaty and truth are all within our stride if we want to take them. Now is not the moment to rest. Now is the moment to stride on. The time is here to give First Nations people our voice in the decisions made about us. Do we think a government could leave First Nations culture exposed to COVID? No. Would First Nations people be forced by overcrowding to isolate in tents and sheds? Will we still suffer the ongoing epidemic of suicide amongst our young people? A Labor government will not force this country to hold its breath again. We will move on a referendum to get the voice established in the Constitution. We will establish the Makarrata Commission for Treaty and Truth. These steps in the Uluru Statement are fundamental, necessary and urgent. But they are not radical. They do not arrive out of the blue. They are not a storm to be weathered. They are the next steps in our reconciliation journey, a journey over a century long, a journey Aboriginal people started on decades before we were counted as citizens. The apology recognised the journey we have taken. It recognised how far we have to go. It is up to us as a parliament, as a people, to resolutely take the next steps and lay down our own marker. We can do this. We must. Yeah.